What's up, everybody? Rosa the Rascal 15 here, and today I'm going to be doing a top 15 Resident Evil games ranking. Real simple, all I'm going to do is just rank the 15 mainline games in the entire franchise. This is not going to include any of the spin offs, so you're not going to see Resident Evil Outbreak File 1 and 2 on here. You're not going to see the Umbrella or Darkside Chronicles. You're not going to see Operation Raccoon City or Umbrella Corps, and you're not going to see any of the handheld spin offs like Resident Evil Gaiden or Mercenaries 3D. However, you are going to see one handheld game, and that's Revelations, because that was actually a canonical game in the storyline. So you're going to be seeing the 10 mainline entries, the 3 remakes, and the 2 Revelations games. Those are going to count for the top 15. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. As you can see here, I have all the games on here. I have all 15 of the mainline games here on my phone. And we're going to get started with my number 15th, and my number 15 is Resident Evil Revelations 2. Now, before anybody gets mad in the comment section or starts spamming in the comments, Rosie, I love this game. How dare you give this number 15? In fact, I'm going to unsubscribe right now and leave a dislike and leave a hate comment. Hear me out. None of these games are terrible. Even the certain game in this franchise that everyone likes to say is terrible, I don't even find it as bad as everyone says it is. But Resident Evil Revelations 2 to me is a game that just, for all the Resident Evil games in the mainline series, this is probably the most, I don't know, generic game in the franchise. Now, I have nothing against this game in terms of bringing back Barry Burton and Claire Redfield for another adventure. It's pretty cool, but I don't like a lot of the writing in this. I really don't feel like it's as strong as some of the other Resident Evil storylines in the franchise. Now, granted, I know you don't play Resident Evil for the story. Mostly you play it for the horror, the cheesy dialogue, and the really fun action. But, yeah, and the puzzles, of course. But, yeah, this one, for me, just, I don't know, it just kind of had some pretty cringy dialogue, and I really don't like some of the characters in this game. I really don't like Barry Burton's daughter in this game, Moira. She's very unlikable, and she's very cringy with her dialogue. And I just don't find myself finding this one all that much really. Like, it's an episodic game. I just don't find it very memorable. But it's by no means a god awful game. It's just, for me, it's one of the most boring games in the franchise, and I never clicked with this one as much as some of my fans may like this game. And if you like it, power to you. But for me, this is number 15 because I just found it very boring, and I just didn't really like the enemy designs in this one. And honestly, I don't really go back to this one. This is probably the only game in the franchise that feels kind of like it was copying other games. It reminded me too much of The Last of Us and The Evil Within. And I feel like those two games were even better than this. But I digress. That's my number 15. Revelations 2. Could have been better, but could have been a hell of a lot worse. Okay, so at number 14th, guys, I've been debating on this one. And now I was thinking about putting Resident Evil 6 at number 14, but honestly, I'm probably going to get a lot of crap for this, but I'm going to put Revelations 1 at number 14. I don't hate this game. I honestly don't. Honestly, I kind of feel like this game has a lot of good ideas. I feel like there's some really unique ideas with the fact like this one wants to take place on a boat, even though that's been done in Resident Evil Dead Aim and Resident Evil Gaiden, but those aren't on the list because those are spin-offs. This game had a really cool idea of it being one of the first like Resident Evil games that was kind of on a handheld besides Resident Evil Gaiden, where it wanted to take place on a boat with Jill Valentine and her friend or partner, excuse me, named Parker. But for me, this one, where I think it's at least this one's a little bit more memorable to me than Revelations 2. This game's story is probably one of the worst in the franchise. It's very convoluted, and it focuses too much on global terrorism or bioterrorism, whatever the hell. It should just focus on zombies and viruses and, figuring out the mystery behind that. This game for me was a little too much about, like, that. It's about terrorism and political stuff and agents and bullcrap like that. And honestly, it just feels very out of place for Resident Evil. Not to mention, this game for me, it had a tonal issue for me where it had too much of like, the Jill Valentine sections are pretty good because they try to focus more on like horror and puzzle, where the Chris Redfield sections, and I forget the name of the other character, but there's like these two comic relief characters in the game, and their sections go on full on action, and it just feels really out of place for Resident Evil. Honestly, I don't like when Resident Evil focuses too much on the running and gunning, even though I do like shooting stuff in Resident Evil. This feels a little bit like, to me, like a little bit like, I don't know, it was a little too This one just felt a little too much for me. It wasn't like a good balance between action and horror. It just felt like it was an awkward blend between the two. So, Revelations, you're at 14th, although I do love the Joe Valentine costume in this game. Damn. I mean, damn. Alright, so number 13 is going to be Resident Evil 6. Now, I'm pretty sure everybody and their mother and their dad and their brother's brother and their cousin's brother's nephews, roommates, knows everything about how much of a big freaking disappointment this game is. And if you're a Resident Evil fan, you know this is considered by everybody as the worst game in the franchise, even though I 100% disagree. I honestly feel what this game has over the Revelations games is that at least with this game, I was entertained. Now, granted, the game has a lot of issues. It's not very polished. The game's all over the place with the tone. It has too much of like Michael Bay levels of action. It goes a little too far with some of the just over the top goofiness of the game. It takes itself way too serious, even though it's a very silly game. But here's the thing, guys. I like how stupid it is. I mean, this is by no means a great game. In fact, you may even call this a bad game, and I understand, but I had fun with this one compared to Revelations 1 and 2. At least with this one, I can have fun with it. I like the mercenaries mode in the game, and I actually like that this game has a lot of content. However, it is more quantity over quality. However, the game's soundtrack sucks. The story is just convoluted and dumb, but the production value is really nice, so there's a good thing there. And again, it's just too busy for me. Like, there's just too much crap in the game. I wanted to focus on like 7 different characters, and there was a lot of good ideas in this game, but they were not executed well. However, looking back on it, I give it credit for having some of the most creative enemy design in the franchise and for going completely bombastic. But in my opinion, I felt like it was trying to please everybody, but it didn't. So, number 13, I can still have fun with this game, but I'd be lying if I said this was a great game because it's really not. It's one of those so bad it's good kind of games. Alright, so that's my number 13. And at number 12, we are going to have, this might be controversial, we have Resident Evil 0. Now, again, this is another game where I can imagine people in the comments. In fact, I have 2 best friends who love this game. I can see them already leaving comments like, yo, why are you hating on this game? Why are you hating on it? It's a classic. This is when Resident Evil was back in its golden days, when it was a survival horror, fixed camera angle, puzzle solving horror game directed by Japanese people that knew what they were doing. Listen. Of all the tank control era Resident Evil games, because there was, 1996 for me through 2003 was the era when Resident Evil was, fixed camera angles, tank controls, and, just like it had that, like all the first, like, 4 or 5 Resident Evil games were very similar in terms of how they played and how they looked. This, to me, is definitely the worst of the tank control era Resident Evils. And why? Simple. This game has easily one of the most unnecessary plots in the franchise, where it serves as a prequel to the first Resident Evil, but it felt like it didn't go anywhere. It felt so unnecessary. It had a villain that just felt very out of place. He felt like a villain out of like some kind of like Final Fantasy game for me, and the whole like I don't know, it felt very unnecessary. This game felt very unnecessary, and it had some of the most annoying mechanics in the entire franchise. The whole game had this mechanic of you having to drop items and then coming back to it and then dropping items and swapping items, and it was very annoying. And honestly, it's the one thing I don't look forward to if I ever have to play this game again. I don't hate it because honestly it is better than it is better than Resident Evil 6 because at least this game is polished, but it is not a great game in terms of being a very good story or a very well done mechanics. Like it is polished. The game looks great. It has a fantastic soundtrack. I love the sound design, but it doesn't nail the landing for me. It has a lot of annoying mechanics that keep me from loving it. So that's the reason why I have it at number 12. Alright, so number 11. Man, what's going to be my number 11th? I think my number 11, and I can say this with a straight face, is going to be Resident Evil Code Veronica. Now, another fan favorite, but why don't I love it as much as some people do? This game kind of has a problem of it overstays its welcome. It has a lot. This is probably one of the longest games in the franchise, and it has no business being this long. Some of the voice acting in this game is so bad that it's good. so that's a positive. I think the whole Chris and Claire, as you can see on the cover, it's really cool to see Chris and Claire in a game together, even though it's till the end of the game. It's a very good story. That's the one thing I do love about this game is the story in this is actually surprisingly good. At least in my opinion, I like the story of the Ashfords. I like the setting of the game where it takes place like at a palace, and it also takes place like at a Antarctic base. It's very unique. It's very different from the franchise. I love the amount of like weapons you get to use in the game, and I just love the sheer variety and the the level design. But what is the main problem I have with this game? Like I said, it overstays its welcome, and there's some janky shit in this game. I'm not gonna lie. There's some stuff in here that feels like very like I don't know, like it just feels off. Like it could have been more polished. Like there's a lot of mechanics in the game that kind of annoy me. It's hard to explain unless you play the game. It feels off. It's with the animations and stuff, but it's not a bad game. It's honestly really good. What saves this game for me is the story's pretty good and the cutscenes are really well done. And this was a marvel at the time. This was actually one of the first Resident Evil games to be done with 3D instead of the pre-rendered background. So it's a good game. I could if this is one of your favorites, I understand there are good things in it, but what holds it back for me is like I said, some of the janky stuff in the game, and the game overstays its welcome, and there is some cryptic stuff. If you don't know about this cryptic part of the game, you might screw yourself over and soft lock yourself, and that cannot be forgiven. There is a part of the game where if you didn't have this item at this certain place, or if you didn't know you're going to switch characters at this certain time, you would basically screw yourself over for the next character. I cannot forgive the game for that. That is one thing I dislike about this game. That's what I mean. Like this game has some jank in it, but other than that, it's a good Resident Evil game. I still enjoyed this one. Okay, so from here on out, guys, these are all games I enjoy. The first like 4 games or 5 games on this list were just ones I kind of just feel like I have a hard time. Like I'm never gonna go back to Revelations 2 or 1. I don't really like them. Resident Evil 6, I don't think I'm ever gonna go back to that game. And Resident Evil 0, I definitely don't want to go back to. Code Veronica depends on the mood I'm in. I can go back to that. But here on out, the top 10, these games I can replay any day of the week. These are the Resident Evil games I will definitely replay. So at number 10, we're going to have Resident Evil 5. Now, this was actually one of the best-selling games in the franchise, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people played this game. It might have been their first Resident Evil games. This was the first game to be co-op. And unfortunately, this was the first Resident Evil game that kind of started to go more into the action direction, even more than Resident Evil 4. And I don't like the fact that this game kind of tries to be like Resident Evil 4, but bigger and better, even though, in my opinion, it doesn't do it better, but it does do it bigger. There's a lot of really good boss battles in this game, and I like how epic the game feels. Like, the game feels very grand in scale. It's one of the biggest adventures in the franchise. That's not Resident Evil 6. But honestly, I think what saves the game for me is I actually do like the story in this too. I actually like that Wesker, he's like this almost like comic book villain to the game, and I don't know, I just find myself going back to this one because it's really fun with the co-op. But my real negatives is that yes, this isn't really a scary game, and it does go a little too far with the action. Not as bad as Resident Evil 6, but it does have a little too much action for me, but I really like how well made this game is. I mean, it's very polished. Unlike Resident Evil 6, this game is very polished. It doesn't have too many like janky things in it. Resident Evil 6 felt very unpolished, but this game feels really good. I like the story for the most part. The only gripes I have is just that it tries too much to copy like RE4, and the worst thing about it is that it does go a little too far with the action. The game doesn't really have a scary tone, but it sure is fun as hell. This is probably one of the funnest entries in the franchise, so if this is in your like top 5, I understand. But for me, it's in my top 10 because this doesn't represent the franchise very well, even though I do enjoy this game. Also, I don't really like Chris Redfield. He's kind of one of my least favorite characters in the franchise, but I digress. Just my opinion. I don't like Chris Redfield. Alright, number 9, we are going to go with another controversial one. Might be, let's see, number 9 is going to be, I think I'm going to go with, this is tough, number 9 if I had to pick. I'm thinking, okay, this might be really controversial, but I'm going to go with Resident Evil 3 Remake. I actually like this game, but this was a very disappointing game compared to the Resident Evil 2 Remake. This game, unfortunately for me, felt a little rushed, and it didn't have as much content in it as I thought it would. compared to the RE2 remake. I actually did a review for this game on my channel, so you can look that up on my channel if you want to know my more in-depth thoughts on it. I still love this game. I still think this is a really solid action horror game. It's really good. The only gripes I have is that it's too short. It felt kind of like a cash grab, and it's not as good as the original. The original Resident Evil 3 was way better. It had way more content, and it had a lot more interesting ideas that no other Resident Evil game did. Like where it had the original Resident Evil 3 had this system where you would have to pick choices, and depending on what choices you made, that would lead to a different path. And unfortunately, they removed that in the remake. A lot of costumes got cut out, and it just felt for me like it just didn't nail the landing. But it's still a good game. If you don't compare it to the original, it's a solid action horror game. If you do compare it to the original, this one kind of falls on its face. But I still enjoy this game despite its issues. It's still pretty damn fun, and it's very, 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 very tough if you play on the hardest difficulty. But honestly, I'm not a difficulty whore, so I don't really play it on hard mode, so I always put it on normal. But anyways, it's a really fun game. I still recommend playing it, but definitely play the RE2 remake. Okay, so at number 8, I'm going to actually have the original Resident Evil. Now, some people would be like, whoa, this should be in the top 5. Why is it at number 8? Well, simple. This game hasn't really aged too well. Not that it's bad, but it unfortunately, it just hasn't, time hasn't been kind to it. The game is infamously known for its really, really cringy, really horrible dialogue. So bad that it's good, There's a real infamous line of the, Jill, here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you. Or, that was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich, which became a meme in the Resident Evil community. There's a lot of things I still love about this game, despite the fact it has aged like milk. I really dig the hell out of this game's tone. It's very scary. Well, for me, it's scary. I mean, the game has a really eerie tone to it. The soundtrack is really good. I love the characters in this game, even though I'm not a crazy about Chris Redfield. This is the only game I really like Chris Redfield in. I don't know, he became kind of a generic soldier character for me in the later games, but anyways, I really like Jill Valentine. I love Barry. I love Rebecca. This was the first time we met Wesker, and I like the tone of this game. Like I said, it's very atmospheric. You being in the mansion, it's very eerie. I love the puzzles. It's still a really good game. Honestly, I still recommend checking this game out, but in my opinion, I think its remake is far superior. But I still love the original Resident Evil. Again, my only complaints is that it hasn't aged well in terms of the graphics and in terms of the voice acting. But other than that, the gameplay still holds up pretty well. It's still really damn fun, despite the fact the game doesn't look great. But again, it's an old game, so give it some slack. Alright, so at number, let's see, what number are we at? Let's see, number 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. I think we're in the top 7, right? I think we're in the top 7, yeah. Okay, so at number 7, I'm going to have, this might be another controversial one, I'm going to put Resident Evil Village at number 7. I'll be on, or is this number 8? I lost track. Whatever number is the next one after, man, I wasn't keeping track. Crap, I should have. What number am I on? Because look, okay, let me do it like this. Look, number 15, 14. This is all unscripted, by the way. 13, 12, and then I had this at 11, I believe, and this was 10, and then this was 9, this was 8. Okay, yeah. Okay, so this is number 7. Okay, just checking. All right, so number 7. This is so funny that I kept this in. I'm keeping in this video, by the way. I'm keeping this in. Number 7, I have Resident Evil Village, which is the most recent game that just came out. Why is this at number 7? I'll be honest with you. This is a really damn good game. It's really, really good. But there's that but. This is probably the most recent game on the list, so I'm still kind of having this game sink in a little bit. Maybe it'll be lower on my list. I mean, when I mean lower, I mean, higher on the list, in the top 5. But I love this game either way. This is a really damn good game, and of course, everybody knows about the vampire mom in this game, Lady Dimitrescu. She's one of the most iconic characters in the franchise now. So many cosplayers, so many people dressing up like that vampire mama. It's nuts. Anyways, I love this game. I love the fact that it's really like basically a Resident Evil 4 sequel, but done better than say Resident Evil 5 and 6 would try to be like, which we're trying to be like Resident Evil 4. But I feel like this game does it in the right ways where it combines action and horror just like RE4. And I like the fact that it's about werewolves and vampires and like mythical creatures that aren't zombies. It's a nice, refreshing take on the franchise, but it still has to do with the virus, so isn't too far fetched because people are like saying, "What do werewolves and vampires have to do with Resident Evil?" Well, this game still focuses on Umbrella and the virus, but it's just a different take on the franchise. Anyways, I love this game. I have really no complaints. I think the gameplay's solid. It's really damn fun. I love the amount of exploration you can do in the game. My only, I guess, small negative is just that the game. I'm not a fan of the ending to the game. The ending for the game feels a little like it's gonna be like left for DLC. And Ethan Winters, I mean, some people like him. I think he's an okay character, but honestly, he's probably like the most like boring character in the franchise. But again, he's supposed to be the everyday guy, so I'm thinking he would fit more into like say Silent Hill than Resident Evil. But that's just my opinion. Anyways, number 7, Resident Evil Village, great game, love it, absolutely love it. All right, so at number 6, we are gonna have the original Resident Evil 3. Now, this was actually one of the first Resident Evil games I played. In fact, this was actually the first Resident Evil game I owned thanks to a cousin of mine who donated this game back to me in the day just because he hated this game. He absolutely hated it. He said he couldn't get into it, that the controls were terrible. Um, I'll be honest with you, I think this game has really aged pretty well for the most part. I think the game has really good voice acting, albeit cheesy. The gameplay has really held up really, really well. Honestly, of the tank control Resident Evil games, this is probably the best playing game in the franchise from the tank controlled ones. You have like a dodge move, a rolling move. You can do like pushbacks and counters. I love in the franchise. I just have one gripe with this game, and it's just the story. Not that the story's terrible, but it isn't as interesting as some of the other Resident Evil games. It kind of feels more like a side story. In fact, it was supposed to be a side story for Resident Evil 2, but instead it ended up being a sequel. But I still enjoy this game. I love a lot of the gameplay. It's one of the hardest games in the franchise, but I love the hell out of this game. I love the gameplay. I love the soundtrack especially. It's super fun. I think it's really damn good. I love the atmosphere and tone of this game where you're at the end of Raccoon City, and honestly, it's iconic for me just going through Raccoon City fighting zombies. This is pretty much the quintessential zombie game. This is what I think of when I think of Resident Evil. Just zombies in a city, and the whole city's gone to shit, and it's up to you to survive. It's a really damn good game, but it's hard as hell. But I love the hell out of this game. Really good. Uh, Despite the story not being really that interesting. Number 5 is going to be another recent game. It's going to be Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Now, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard is actually the 7th game in the franchise, and this is the first game that introduced Ethan Winters, who's the main character in Resident Evil 8. Resident Evil Biohazard is actually a really good return to the franchise. After Resident Evil 6, the franchise kind of took a stumble after that. It kind of just had like a just crappy spin-offs, and you had the Revelations games, which I feel for me are some of the weakest games in the franchise. At least that's in my opinion. And then you just had like just really bad spin-offs. You had Umbrella Corps, which is the worst thing the franchise has ever given us. You had Operation Raccoon City, and just everything after Resident Evil 6 just sucked for me. It was pretty bad. So this game took it back to its roots, and this is probably one of the most memorable games in the franchise for me. The story of this game, albeit it does have a few plot holes, is still really damn good. It gave us some of the most memorable villains in the entire franchise with the Baker family. I loved the tone and atmosphere. This is probably one of the scariest games in the entire franchise. In fact, that's one thing I forgot to mention about Resident Evil Village. Resident Evil Village is a scary game, albeit it's scary in the sense of it's intense. This game's more scary in the terms of it's dark, it's atmospheric, and you always feel like there's something that's creeping up on you. Honestly, if you play the game in VR, it's terrifying. I love this game. It's a survival horror game, and it went back to its roots, and it's hard as hell. Especially if you play it on like Madhouse difficulty. Jesus Christ, it is one of the hardest games in the franchise when you put it on that difficulty. But it's a great game. I love the tone. I love the atmosphere. I love the villains. I love this game. I guess my only like small gripe is that the main character is really not that great, and albeit some of the music in the game is not really memorable. Although I do remember the main theme song to the game, and I dig the hell out of the save room theme. But Other than that, number 5. Okay, whew, how many games have we gone through? All right, this is going to be the top 4, ladies and gentlemen. These are pretty much the ones where I'm like, these are almost like near perfect for me. These are like 10 out of 10 games for me. And at number 4, we are going to have the Resident Evil 2 remake. I fucking love this game. This game was how you do a remake. This is one of the best remakes I played in recent memory. This is one of the best Resident Evil games in recent memory. This game is fantastic. I love that it's basically a remake of one of my favorite installments in the franchise, Resident Evil 2. I love Leon and Claire. I love the police station. I love this game. I'm trying not to be a fanboy about this game. You know, me talking about the game like this, you think this would have been my number 1, but it's not. What's my main gripe with this game? I only have one gripe, and that's the fact that they kind of dropped the ball on the second run campaigns, where they kind of don't have the B scenario campaigns from the original Resident Evil 2, which for me kind of hurt the game. But other than that, this is a really damn good Resident Evil game. The graphics are excellent. The voice acting is really good. It took itself more serious. Honestly, it's just a phenomenal game. I really have no complaints. This is pretty much the best modern Resident Evil game you can play on current consoles, in my opinion. Like, this game, to me, is like a 10 out of 10. I love the amount of replay value. I love how polished it is. I love how freaking gory it is. I just love this game. It's a good, great horror game. Honestly, it is a pretty much near perfect game, but I only think one game's better than this game. And my number 3 is actually the original Resident Evil 2. Why do I have the original above the remake? Only one reason, and it's not because nostalgia. It's actually the fact that I feel like this game has a little more content than the remake, where you have the B scenarios, which actually change up the story. So there's 4 campaigns, and the one thing I have to admit about the original that beats the remake, like no contest, is the soundtrack. The soundtrack to Resident Evil 2 is by far my favorite soundtrack in the entire franchise, but the remake, the soundtrack's not that memorable. So that's why I actually prefer the original. Also, I don't know, I just like the fact the original, to me, just, I don't know, it just did things a little bit better in some areas. However, the remake does a lot of things too better than the original. Obviously, the remake looks more modern, and, you know, it takes itself more serious, and it's more polished. Obviously, it's a more modern game, so it's going to be automatically, like, more, you know, it's going to age a lot better, but the original Resident Evil 2 is still pretty fucking good. I'm not going to lie. This is one of the best games in the franchise. It's definitely the best of the trilogy. It's one of the best Resident Evil games. It's one of the best survival horror games. It's just a phenomenal game. But at number 2, I'm going to have the Resident Evil remake of the first game, which came out in 2002 on the GameCube. Wow, man. I mean, wow. This is... I mean, just like the Resident Evil 2 remake, this is how you do a remake, but I feel like this remake, unlike the RE2 remake, surpasses the original. I feel the Resident Evil 2 remake's just as good as the original Resident Evil 2. This one, to me, is miles better than the original. Some of the best graphics I've seen on the GameCube, some of the best horror in the franchise. I feel like this is the scariest game in the entire franchise, in my opinion. I love how polished this game is. Honestly, this might be one of the best survival horror games, right up there with Silent Hill 2 for me. This is like a 10 out of 10 survival horror game. It's scary, it's tough, it's really good, and it just pretty much did everything better than the original. That mansion setting has never looked any scarier than it does here. And I just got a ad for cricket coupons. Thank you, phone. Thank you. Alright. This game, like I said, I recommend playing it. It's fucking great. It's one of the best remakes. Have no complaints. Absolutely no complaints. Other than maybe my only nitpick is some of the dialogue's cheesy, but it wasn't the original, but it's a lot more well acted. One of the best games in the franchise. However, my number 1, it's going to be very original. It's going to be Resident Evil 4. Now, before anybody says it, before anyone types it, obvious choice is obvious, or this isn't even the scariest game in the franchise. No, it's not. It's not the scariest game in the franchise. Honestly, the Resident Evil 1 remake and Resident Evil 2 remake are way scarier than this. Even Resident Evil 7 is scarier than this game. However, why do I have this as number 1? Simple. This is one of the most content-packed, one of the most fun entries in the franchise, one of the most polished games in the franchise, one of the most memorable games in the franchise, one of the games that, even if you're not a non-Resident Evil fan, even the non-Resident Evil fans agree this game's great. This game, to me, pleased everybody for the most part. Unlike Resident Evil 6, where that game was trying to please everybody, this game for me did it like 100 million times better than Resident Evil 6, where this was a game where I'm like, it did please everyone. It pleased Resident Evil fans. It pleased non-Resident Evil fans. It brought in a new genre of action horror. It pretty much reinvented how we do horror games from here on out. A lot of games started to borrow from this. A lot of games started to copy Resident Evil 4. And it's gotten, it's still one of those games that I feel like you can go back to, and it's aged like wine. Now, it's not by any means the scariest game in the franchise, because that is one thing I do have to say. It's not scary. Well, it does have its moments of terror, but it's not as scary as some of the other games. But other than that, this is a phenomenal game. Obviously, I'm not going to beat a dead horse. Everybody knows how good this game is. It's one of the best games in the franchise. Guys, I've talked long enough. This video's gone on long enough. That was my ranking of the 15 Resident Evil mainline games. Hopefully you liked my ranking. Please leave a comment. Maybe you can leave a comment on what your ranking is, or if you never played Resident Evil, hopefully I got you, you can use this video as a recommendation of which games to play, and my personal recommendation. So definitely check out the top 10 games I did in this video. The other 5 games in the 10 through 15, I recommend skipping those. 10 through 6 are like definitely like, yeah, check those out. But 5 through 1, like on my ranking, I'm not numbering the games. Like the top 5 I just did right now on my list, those are the ones you need to buy. And that's it, guys. Without further ado, hope you enjoyed my video. Take care, everyone. God bless. Stay safe. Have an awesome Christmas. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Take care, everyone. Have a great one. Bye. Rosie out.